Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast with your hosts, Betsy Westhafer and Tony Bodoh. Join Betsy and Tony as they dive in with highly successful C-suite leaders who have grown successful organizations by creating a laser focus on listening to their customers and building deep customer relationships. Now, it's time to join Betsy and Tony for the Really Know Your Customer show.
Welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast. I'm Tony Bodoh.
Hey, Tony, it's Betsy. Glad to have everybody here today. Scott Miller is our guest today. Tell us about Scott, Tony.
Well, I'm excited because Scott is actually the head of thought leadership from FranklinCovey, and he's been in a number of roles with FranklinCovey over the years, but this one in particular, where he at today. And in this role, he is really leading the charge of where they go next in the organization. And so he absolutely has to understand who the customer is, what they need to know, and where they're headed in their lives and in their businesses next. And that's why I'm so excited to have Scott on today.
Yeah, I was so looking forward to this conversation. So without further ado, Scott Miller, welcome to the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Tony, Betsy, thank you for the platform today. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So you, in addition to your day job, you do a lot of other cool stuff too. You're a columnist, you are a podcaster, the On Leadership podcast, which as I was sharing before we went live, is one of my all-time new favorite podcasts. It's just full of great information, amazing guests. So you do a whole lot of other things too, but just give us a little background on a little more detail on your career path and how you landed to be the EVP of Thought Leadership at FranklinCovey.
Sure. So in no order, I'm 52. I'm a dad and a husband. I live here in Salt Lake City with my wife, where FranklinCovey is headquartered. We have 3 sons who lamentably all have my personality. They are 6, 8, and 10. And it's likely they're going to come around here any moment with their underwear on a sword. It's kind of the new normal, right, in the pandemic. So forgive me if you see my 3 twins running around. I'm from Orlando, Florida, originally. I lived half my life in Orlando, half my life here in Salt Lake. I worked for the Disney company for 4 years. And just shy of 4 years, Disney invited me to leave, which is a cordial way of saying get out. And it was the FranklinCovey company that had met me actually with some partnerships at Disney that recruited me out to Utah. So here you had 25 years ago, a single Catholic boy from Orlando moving to Provo, Utah. And that's like being Jewish and moving to Vatican City, right? It's like culturally kind of crazy, but it's been a great ride. And I started as a frontline salesperson for the FranklinCovey company, but it's now by most measures the world's most preeminent leadership development firm, based here in Salt Lake, but offices around the world. Started selling leadership solutions to universities, school districts, colleges, became a sales manager, spent a year in the UK office, became a sales vice president, became the company's first chief marketing officer. I served in that role for 8 years, which is almost 3 times the national average for a tenure for a CMO. The average is somewhere between 3.5 and 4 years. And then about 2 years ago, I stepped away from the chief marketing officer role and kind of appointed myself as the executive vice president of thought leadership in unison with the CEO and the board. We'd never had a thought leadership strategy. We had thought leadership, but not a thought leadership strategy. So it was in that role that I became what is now the host of the world's largest leadership podcast called On Leadership with Scott Miller every week. I've been privileged to co-author or author multiple books. I have 2 more books coming out next year. I write a column for Inc. magazine every week. I, up until recently, hosted a radio program on iHeartRadio, but it was just too much. I had to focus and not do 40 things at B level. I had to do 39 things at A level. I'm kidding, right? So I had to get some focus in my life. So I've got a few reps when it comes to working with clients, building our brand, and just saying no to a lot of things and saying yes to some things. I'm honored to be here today.
Well, we are really honored to have you. One of the things that we talked about when we first met you, Scott, was just about how difficult it can be for companies to view themselves accurately versus through the eyes of their customers. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think that's just a common perception in life, right? Is we see the world as we are, not as it is. And so I think, no matter what role you're in in a leadership role in a company, it's so imperative to move outside of the fake reality you've built, right? I mean, here's a great example of FranklinCovey. So we're a 40-year-old company. We formed by the Franklin Quest company, which was the planning company, right? A $500 million paper planning company, and the Covey Leadership Center, which was a private boutique leadership consulting company. We merged 25 years ago to become FranklinCovey. But our legacy to the world is the planner people or the 7 Habits people. We had 170 retail stores 15 years ago selling the Franklin Planner. There was 40 million people buying them a year. We sold that business over a decade ago. But when most people think of us, they think of us as, oh yeah, I used to have that planner. And so they have a paradigm about it. And it's really hard for us to shake it. But we have disassociated ourselves with that product, that brand 15 years ago. But it's the first thing that comes to mind for every chief learning officer, every chief human resource officer, every CEO, because they're not in their 30s, they're usually in their 40s or 50s or 60s, right? At some point we'll age out of that brand. But for us, we face the same problem because even though we have moved beyond, our buyers, our target buyers are still very much associating us with our legacy brands. So I think it's important for us to confront reality and to recognize that what we think isn't reality. It's what our marketplace, what our buyers think. Of course, we can't boil the ocean, right? We have to be very thoughtful around whose perceptions we change. We're not trying to change, 8 billion people's perception. We're probably trying to change a couple of million people's perception. So it's with that discipline that we're better able to focus in on whose minds are we trying to change. And we call that spear fishing versus net fishing. I think a lot of organizations get caught up into net fishing, and we've been pretty deliberately successful at being more particular around whose opinions we care about shaping accurately.
It's really intriguing to me because, like you said, I'm still one of those people that no matter how often you tell me that you're not associated with the planning company, I'm still thinking about that. I still walk through the aisles of the office stores and see them there, know. So it's interesting to me. So if we look at where you're at today and what FranklinCovey does as an organization today, I'm very familiar. Past organizations I worked with, you'd used at that time was called the 4 Disciplines of Execution, worked very well, the BHAGs and all of those other wonderful things that were in the program. So where has FranklinCovey gone since then? That was probably 10 or 12 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of change in the world, a lot of growth. So where have your customers taken you? Where have you gone?
So like a lot of organizations, we have successfully disrupted ourselves prior to the market disrupting us. I give our CEO credit for being exceptionally talented at looking around corners, kind of seeing, where do we need to be 3 years from now? Bob is very intellectually agile, and he's great at, that adage of kind of where is the puck going to land, like skating to the puck. He's good at being there before the puck lands there. Because he's humble and doesn't need to be a genius, right? He's very thoughtful around looking at the landscape. So FranklinCovey's made some major transitions. As you mentioned, thought leadership, of which I'm responsible for shepherding, really helps to identify challenges that organizations have that are coming up and making sure that we're there at the right time. Typically, here's a great example. We're launching a book in October called The Leader's Guide to Unconscious Bias. It's like 5 months late. You know what I mean? It'll be a great book in October. We've been working on it for 2 years. We have a solution. But I wish that book had come out in June, right? But it'll be a great solution. But we really try to keep our pulse on where companies are going to be struggling. We don't create solutions that we're passionate about. We create solutions that our clients are passionate about. And then we become passionate about them. We don't try to force our solution on clients, right? We carefully listen, hopefully, to what clients are struggling with and then decide, can we be the best at that in the world? So we've pivoted, to your point, to become, we were a B2C company, selling tens of millions of individual tools a year. We migrated over to being kind of a B2B company, a training company. And in the last 4 years, we've transitioned ourselves to a SaaS company. We're now a subscription organization where a company comes in and buys a license to our intellectual property. And now they have an enterprise-wide access to all of our content. Now, hundreds of tools and hundreds of assessments and 30 contents, not one content. And then we provide our clients with a docent, if you will, or an implementation specialist to help to navigate this large library of content that can help to solve their problems. So we're not trying to be the Amazon of training. We're not trying to be the biggest training aggregator by any stretch. We're trying to be a one-stop shop, if you will, for organizations that are trying to achieve their top priorities, build a great culture, and to develop leaders. And I think we've skated to where the puck is going to land.
I find it really interesting that you've made that migration, because on this podcast, we've actually talked with companies that have been in the tech space and moved from like selling the on-premises, capital intensive software and hardware to where now they're doing a software as a service model, very much like you're describing, where you have training as a service. That change there really means you have to listen to the customer even more, because they can cancel their subscription at any point, rather than if you sell them a year-long package or a 2-year-long training package that they're going to be in for a period of time. Now they can cancel at a much faster pace. So I imagine there's been some changes in how you really listen to the customer as well.
Yeah. I think a couple of things, Tony, great insight. I think if someone is canceling their subscription with us, shame on us, not shame on them. Because we go into every client opportunity thinking, how are we going to provide so much value that cancellation isn't even an option? It's all about expansion. It's all about, how do you move from 200 people to 800 people? So we take cancellation very personally, because then we think we've not done our job. Because if we sell on budget, or we sell on initiative, or we sell on anything other than this is going to make your organization more successful, then we've sold the wrong solution to the wrong client. So we're very thoughtful around making sure we are very clear on what does the client need, not what do we need. Because you know what? We don't want business for 1 year, right? It's not what our investors want. It's not what our board wants. We want clients for life. So I think one of the things, again, that our executive team has done is not just listen to the industry, but to watch other industries. Now, I don't think this is proprietary, but one of the reasons why we moved to a subscription model is our CEO, his home is in Park City, Utah, the ski resort, 30 miles from here. And for several years, he was watching Vail Resorts come in and kind of take over Park City. And they had this thing called the Epic Pass. And as you know, the Epic Pass allowed you to ski at Whistler and Beaver Creek and Vail and Park City. And they were decimating the ski industry, because once they bought up 10 resorts, there was no reason to ski anywhere else. If you had an Epic Pass for $600, whatever it was, you could ski everywhere. And it completely disrupted the industry. So here our CEO is kind of looking out of his window every day, watching thousands and thousands of cars drive into the Vail Resort to not go to other resorts. And you couldn't even get up to church on Sunday in Park City because the cars were backed up out to the highway miles. Everybody bought an Epic Pass. I was late to Mass a couple of times because of the Epic Pass. And Catholics aren't late to church. You know that, right? You don't walk in behind the priest.
You're talking to 2 other Catholics, by the way.
Well, I did not know that, but that's a cardinal sin. You don't walk in behind the priest at church. There's no such thing as a late Catholic. So it was an insightful analysis to watch Bob look at other industries, right? Not just the training industry or the consulting industry, but the ski industry, and co-opt or adapt innovations that were before our time. It is why FranklinCovey is, I don't say thriving, but certainly surviving in the pandemic. The industry is being decimated because no one is getting on a plane and flying to a client with 30 people in a room, right? It's all being done virtually now. And so we have been able to thrive in terms of retention, expansion, new logos, new opportunities, clients that aren't canceling, but they're seeing the value of investing in their people. And so I really credit our leadership team, specifically our CEO, with that emotional agility to understand where is the learning, right, out there, and it may not be right in front of you in your own industry.
That is such an interesting concept, to not only really know your customers, really know your industry, but also as you said, observe other industries and see what's going on out there.
Yeah.
What strikes me about one of the things you said is this journey from back in the days of the planner, which I have this, when you were talking about emotional agility, I have this emotional response when I think about FranklinCovey, because I used to have to drive like 25 minutes away to go get my new planner pages. And I remember doing that year after year, and I loved it. I get so excited, and it's all new stuff. And so all of that goodwill, and I know a lot of people feel the same way about that, but that goodwill, I think, has stayed with your company, even though you're a very different company now than you were 25 years ago. I feel like that goodwill is still there. Plus all of the great content that's come out that people know, the 7 Habits and 40X and all of that great stuff that people really are attached to. So getting a little bit tactical, how do you go about listening to your customers? What do you do so that you know that you're getting the right insights?
Yeah, I think your insight is right on the goodwill, and it can be a double-edged sword, right? Because a lot of our time is spent kind of re-educating people. They think we're one thing and they realize, I had no idea you were this, right? And we also aren't ashamed of our legacy. It's, we're very proud of all we've been in 40 years. To answer your question, Betsy, I think a couple of things. I think if you're going to listen to your customer, humility is a leadership competency, right? I mean, it's to recognize that you may not be the smartest person in the room, and that your customers often use a different language than you do. I mean, it's fascinating to me how often we'll go into a customer and they'll call something, we have a trust problem. And we think immediately, oh, that's this solution. What they really have is an execution issue, right? Or they might say we have a deliverable issue, but it's really a clarity on expectations issue. So we have to make sure that our sales staff, our sales leaders, our product innovators, chief marketing officers, chief innovations officers are really thoughtful around listening is what they call it, what we call it. Because like any company, we have a whole cadre, right? A vocabulary, a lexicon of things that, well, we've named it this, therefore that's what no, not at all, right? We have to be very thoughtful around making sure that all of the heavy nomenclature that we've attached in our own culture as experts doesn't cloud what the customer calls it, because lots of times we're talking about the same thing, but we're not solving the same problem. Or we're solving a similar problem, but we're calling it differently. So we spend an enormous amount of time teaching great listening habits to our sales staff. I mean, Dr. Covey wrote this book, The 7 Habits, right? Habit 5 is seek first to understand, then to be understood. I think one of our hallmarks as a sales organization is understanding that most people listen with the intent to respond, not to understand. So I think we do a fairly good job of checking our own language and not immediately rushing to a solution, right? Moving off the solution and digging deep to understand, is what the client is describing the same thing that we think it is, and making sure that our solution exactly matches their need, or if not, refer somebody else in. We're a very abundant company. We don't close every sale. We don't try to force fit, because then you won't have the renewal, right? So if the sale should go to Vital Smarts, we'll take them to Vital Smarts. If we think Ken Blanchard's solution is better for them, most of our people will recommend that, because the client will come back to you and they'll remember that you tried to steer them in the best direction for them. And that comes back decade after decade, right? I imagine anecdotally, for every sale we've lost, we've probably landed 5 or 6 later on because the client knew we had their best interest in mind. That's not pablum. That's not, some plaque on the wall, FranklinCovey. That's who we are at our core.
I want to shift gears a little bit and turn toward the sales force, because you gave us a little tidbit as we were preparing. You talked about how you have lead measures in place in the sales team, versus most organizations having these lag measures. And when we talk about, knowing the customer, a lot of those measures that are used today are lag measures, NPS or customer satisfaction, any of those, they're all lag measures. How do you guys look at things from a lead measure perspective to know that you're on target, and maybe to be aware when you're not on target and how to change things?
Well, it's not easy, right? So we didn't move from lead to lag or lag to lead overnight, right? I think it was the introduction of our book, The 4 Disciplines of Execution, that really helped to shape the thinking of our company. I think one of the things I'm most proud about after, almost 25 years in the firm is that we do a really good job of walking our talk. We're not perfect. Someone's gossiped once, right? Something wasn't perfect here or there. I'm sure I did some things wrong back in 1996, not since then, certainly, hardly. To your point around lead and lag measures, it takes discipline because sales leaders, of which I was one, tend to lead their life looking in the rearview mirror, right? Last month's revenue, this month's revenue. And it takes a lot of discipline and foresight and some trust instinctually to say, so what are the indicators that we can impact? You can't impact last month's revenue, right? It's done. You can't impact last month's close rate, but you can impact future behavior. You can impact lead measures that come out of sales activity. So we're very thoughtful around differentiating between activity and results. We're also very disciplined around which activities drive the highest return results. So I think we've talked about it in a different setting. We know the value of a face-to-face meeting. So pretend this was pre-COVID, right? We required with fierce discipline and accountability a minimum of 10 hours a week of face-to-face meetings, meaning our sales staff is in front of a client or a prospective client a minimum of 10 hours a week. That doesn't include, at the time, Skype calls or webinars or things like that, right? As you're at, Chick-fil-A having lunch, right? Or you're in their office talking with them. Because we know, down to the dollar, how much every hour face time with a client correlates to revenue. So we know if someone's goal is, let's just say, $2 million a year, and I'm very comfortable talking about this. We're a for-profit company. We have investors. We have shareholders, right? I own stock in the company. I want us to make our revenue revenue targets. We know to the dollar how much revenue we'll generate out of every hour of face-to-face meeting. This came through, multiple quarters of assessments and analysis, right? And what has to happen during that hour. Not in a contrived way, but what makes a valuable meeting for the client and for you. And then we also aren't Pollyannish around it. We're brutally honest. So how much of that revenue is going to actually close in 60 days, 90 days, 120 days? How much of that will fall from your pipeline, D, C, B, A, right? We were very, very disciplined around correlating face-to-face time, not just to revenue, but to invoiced revenue. And it's been, I think, a key differentiator for our firm, being able to meet our revenue targets by having clear, key predictive lead measures. If you do this, then this will happen. And if you do this, then nothing will happen, or this will happen. And that didn't come overnight, right, Tony? It took, quarters and quarters and quarters of assessing high performers, low performers, the middle 60, the bell curve, and trying to move the middle, so to speak, on if more people do what high performers are doing. Of course, it took a lot of training. It took a lot of investment. It took guaranteeing some salaries for a longer period of time, because you can't just overnight teach someone talents they don't have. You can't just book a face-to-face meeting and twiddle your thumb. You got to be really thoughtful around what types of behaviors happen in a face-to-face meeting that are most predictive of outcome in terms of listening skills, proposals, follow-up, nurturing the client, making sure the client wants to meet with you, right? I mean, an hour sitting for the hostage is a waste of everybody's time, right? So making sure that the client has a problem that they need solved, and that you have a solution that will solve their problem versus trying to uncover one in the conversation. So without giving away our whole strategy or formula, every organization will have different lead measures that are predictive of success that you can influence. Should it be 9 hours? Should it be 11 hours? Is your close rate 30%? Is it 70%? What is it really? I think something else we've done in our culture is we make it safe to tell the truth. Whenever I coach CEOs or leaders, I say, if your team members are lying to you, that's your fault, not theirs. Because you've not created a culture where it is safe to tell the truth. What happens is then people lie to you and then they ambush you. At the last minute, all of a sudden, your $22 million pipeline turned into $4 million. And only $2 million was recognized because people weren't comfortable asking for help. They weren't comfortable admitting they didn't know or understand. So a lot of our training is around making sure everybody is telling the truth to everybody up the letterhead, because you can lose a lot of revenue in a culture that is corrupt or worse, isn't transparent, and everybody wonders why. What happens is people get fired down the letterhead because the top leaders didn't make it transparent for the lower leaders to just tell the truth. Sorry for my soapbox, but that's been key to our success as well.
That's awesome. I think there's so much to that, not just on the internal side, but also with the customers. You have to make it safe for your customers to tell you the truth as well. In a lot of the work that Tony and I do, whether it's more at the B2C level, the B2B level, whatever it is, your customers have to have that trust built in that they can tell you what you need to hear. And so, a lot of the coaching that we do is on, making sure you got to be open to this customer feedback. So it's one thing to listen to the customer, but then take it to heart, be humble about it, receive it in the spirit in which it's intended, and then act on it.
Betsy, can I follow up on that?
Absolutely, please.
One of the most valuable experiences I've been involved in at FranklinCovey in 25 years is we brought in a friend of ours who's the former dean of the Hamburger University at McDonald's. And her name is Diana Thomas, and she went on to become like the VP of training. And we brought in the former CHRO of Southwest Airlines, Ann Rhodes. And we had, most of our sales staff in a 2-hour meeting with them. And we just listened to what their day is like, what their week is like, what their world, these are our buyers, right? CHROs, chief people officers, CLOs. And we just listened, and it was shocking to hear what their day is like, how many emails they get, right? What their gates are, who gets to them, where they seek out information, how you build credibility with them. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've been here for like 20 years. Why weren't we doing this 25 years ago? I bet you it's one of the things that you do well, right? Is you help organizations really understand what are people looking for? How are they listening? How are they searching? What are they thinking about you? And I think like most organizations, we have a level of hubris and arrogance, and we think we know the best. Well, no. Just listen to us. Here's how we do it. I don't care how you do it, right? Here's how we need it. And that takes a lot of humility. It takes you to check your own ego. And I think, look back, we need to do more of that at FranklinCovey. We need to shut our mouth more and just listen to what our prospective customers need and want, when and how, right? And why.
Yeah, when we coach the executives before going into an advisory board meeting, we say, you are here to listen 80% of the time, talk 20% of the time, and that 20% is really made up of clarifying, probing questions so that you can go deeper and deeper and get a better understanding.
Well said.
Yeah, I love the whole thing. Do you have any stories that you can share with us as far as some of your clients that have been going into your content and have learned something that has really propelled them?
Oh, I'm sure, thousands. I thought you were going to go somewhere else. I had a great story to share about a failure.
Oh, no, do that too. Do that first.
Let me share this one.
Yeah.
So back when I was the general manager of our Chicago region, I was living in Chicago for 6 years, about a 17-state region, the largest business in the U.S. for us. We had about 20 salespeople that worked for us. Each of them had, $1 million revenue goal, and they were all 6-figure earners. Well, there was one particular person. She happened to be a female. Gender is immaterial. But if I use her name, know that gender is immaterial. And she had a big deal cooking with a large potential client. And it was like about a high 6-figure deal, which is a big deal for FranklinCovey 15 years ago. And I would do weekly check-ins. And I'm pretty good at peeling the onion. I'm pretty good at getting to the root cause. And it was a custom deal with their logo on it and custom mission statement. And the CEO was going to make an appearance in a video. It was a training solution, right? A cultural training solution for a B2B business. It was a waste management, disposal business. So this deal was going to close, right? 6-figure deal. And she asked me to come up and close the deal. I get on a plane, fly to the state. We walk into the client. This is a seasoned salesperson. I've been in the business for 15 years then, a seasoned salesperson. Now, I'm not the best salesperson in the world, but I have pretty good instincts. And I can tell in a couple interactions if I think you're trustworthy, if I think you're legit. I'm not a suspicious person, but I got pretty good instincts when it comes to human nature. I walk into the business. I ask 3 questions. And I realize there's no business here. There's no deal. There's no deal to close. This deal is 3 people away from being signed. In fact, the person who has to sign off on this doesn't even know there is a deal. It took me 3 questions to ask. So what is your decision-making criteria? Do you have signing authority for this? Is this going to be something you're funding in this year? I mean, just small things that are just, but the salesperson was so kind of caught up in their own excitement and their own narrative. It was oceans apart. The deal never closed because there was no deal, because I think the salesperson was uncomfortable asking the tough questions, moving outside their comfort zone, listening to what the decision-making process was. This isn't original to me, but most people, when they say they've got 20 years of experience, what they really mean is, I have 1 year of experience repeated 19 times. That all of us have to be a little more agile around stretching our skills and disrupting our strategy and moving outside of our comfort zone and, discussing the undiscussables or listening for the bad news, right? Not just listening for the validating news. Now, to your question, oh my gosh, let me tell you about Frito-Lay. So Frito-Lay, of course, is owned by the Pepsi organization, right? PepsiCo. And the CEO of Frito-Lay decided about a decade ago, it was a gentleman. I don't mean to share a positive story about a man, a negative about a female. By the way, this salesperson is now one of our top salespeople in the nation. She's crushing it. I can learn so much from her. She's come so far, hopefully as have I, and we're very good friends. This CEO, this gentleman, decided that the future of Frito-Lay was going to be based in building a high-trust culture, that he so believed in the value of leaders trusting their team members and vice versa, that trust was going to be their ultimate competitive advantage in the snack industry. Trust. Take it where you want, whether or not Fritos or Doritos are good for you or not. That's not my point today, right? I'm not a nutritionist. By the way, I love a good Dorito. The taco flavor ones are the best. Have you ever had taco flavored Doritos?
I have. Oh, I'm going to root for ranch 10 times out of 10.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I like ranch, but the taco flavor ones, baby, that's my weakness. Not only does he decide to train everyone at Frito-Lay in FranklinCovey's Speed of Trust solution, where we spend 2 days, we teach the 13 behaviors of high trust leaders, right? Listening first, talking straight, clarifying expectations, being transparent. Not only does he train every employee in Frito-Lay, he trains the entire supply chain, all their vendors, all their farmers, all their distributors. Frito-Lay underwrites the training for their entire external supply chain, because he realizes when corn prices go up or wheat prices go down or whatever the calamity is, or oil disrupts or whatever it is they have to have, he wants everyone to be on the same page, right? Here's our profit margin, here's your profit margin. And to this day, I think Frito-Lay has one of the strongest cultures and uninterrupted supply chains in any industry, because this CEO's foresight on taking a couple $1 million and training everybody on what it means to be transparent and trustworthy. I'm sure there are problems. I'm sure there's a disgruntled corn farmer somewhere out there. But overall, this is the foresight of a leader that chose to take it all the way even outside the company. What CEO trains their vendors on how to operate with them, right? I bet you Walmart does some of that, by the way. But I think it was a very prescient CEO that, and in fact, several years later, there was, I think, a huge spike or drop in corn prices, and one of them was disproportionately earning more money than the other. But because they had all these principles of how to be trustworthy deeply instilled in their entire supply chain, people understood why margins might be squeezed or why we're buying less or buying more. And I heard some great stories anecdotally on their ability to thrive in tough times because of their investment inside, outside their company. This is one for the ages, Frito-Lay.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah, I'm intrigued by that because when I was going through my MBA program, we studied a lot about information flow and Lean, Six Sigma, all of those wonderful things, right?
No, Tony, we agreed to stay away from Lean and Six Sigma.
I'm not going deeper. Don't worry. But in that process, there's this thing in manufacturing and supply chain called the bullwhip effect, right? And if you shake a whip a little bit here, it has massive effects out there. And why that came to mind as you were talking is, we always talked in my MBA program 20 years ago about the information flow. We never talked, and we talked about accuracy of information, but we never talked about trust. And what's so fascinating with the story you just told in that context, if we look at what just happened here as we were going through COVID-19 and the supply chain mess, because all of a sudden overnight, people go from their offices and eating out to home, and the supply chains cannot shift that fast to take food sources going to restaurants and put them into grocery stores, and toilet paper going to office buildings and warehouses that supply the commercial sector and put it over in the residential sector supply chain. Because we didn't have that clarity, we didn't have that trust, we had panic. And so that's just a minor example of how a supply chain can be brutally disrupted in today's day and age, even though we have tons of information flowing back and forth, because people don't trust. The consumers lack the trust that they would be able to get what they needed, and so they hoard it. So if you have any commentary on that, I'd love to hear that.
Well, first of all the toilet paper was at my mom's house in Florida, I think. So I don't think that was the disruption to the supply chain. But you're right? This is a leadership principle. I'll tell you, I think leaders can over-communicate. You hear this all the time, well, you can't communicate enough. No. Look at the president. This isn't political, but you can over-communicate. I think a leader's job is accurate and concise information flow. You can over-communicate because now you can try to opine on areas in which you're not an expert. You start making stuff up, right? You start fabricating things. You erode trust when what you say is not credible. So I think my advice on that topic, I'm not going to speak to supply chains per se, but I think that a leader's job is to create transparency, to clarify expectations, to make sure that people know what you do know and what you don't know, and that you admit when you don't know. Because absent facts, people make stuff up. And that one of the leader's greatest roles is to declare your intent, right? Is to say, this is my intent with sharing this with you. It might change. One of my favorite statistics I've ever read is there was a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? This book was co-authored by Karen Dillon, the former editor of the Harvard Business Review, and Clayton Christensen, the recently passed innovation expert, both friends of mine, and a third author who escapes me. I'm sorry to him. It's a gentleman. And in this book, How Will You Measure Your Life, they take proven business principles and teach people how to apply it to their personal lives. Phenomenal book, How Will You Measure Your Life? And in this book, they share a statistic from some outside researchers. And Tony, the statistic is that 93% of, quote, successful companies that achieved their revenue goals did so with not their original deliberate strategy, but with a new emergent strategy. Meaning what they set out with is not what got them to their finish line. And that requires, vulnerability, humility, emotional agility, willingness to change your mind, right? An admission that you aren't the smartest person in the room. As a leader, your job is not to be the genius, but the genius maker, to quote Liz Wiseman in her book, Multipliers. Again, another phenomenal leadership book, Multipliers. Best leadership book written in the last decade. I could talk about Multipliers for an hour. And so I do think leaders should be concise and accurate with what they do know and acknowledge what they don't know. So that people don't say, but last week you said this. Yeah, and things have changed, right? So recognize that you set expectations that this is what we know right now. Yes, this may change. We're all in this together. We're not hiding information. We're not hoarding information. But we're also not over-disclosing. so that you don't have to rewind. Because people can handle bad news. What they can't handle is no news or wrong news. And that's a good, I think, leadership lesson for all of us as we're communicating out information to our teams.
So good, Scott. Tell us a little bit about your upcoming book. Tell us a little more detail about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. So like you, I'm privileged to host a podcast. I mentioned it's called On Leadership with Scott Miller. Comes out every Tuesday via email, but it's also on every podcast platform. And we interview a different guest every week. In fact, just an hour ago, I was in the studio interviewing a gentleman named Bobby Herrera. He's a Latino gentleman that wrote a book called The Gift of Struggle. The Gift of Struggle. Beautiful book. And I've decided to write a book every year with my 40, not favorite guests, but my 40 most inspiring insights. So the book is called Master Mentors. It's being published by HarperCollins, 40 Transformative Insights from Our Greatest Minds. So what I've done is from the first 100 interviews, I've curated 40 people: Seth Godin, Dan Pink, Liz Wiseman, Susan Cain, Stephanie McMahon from WWE Wrestling, General Crystal, and a whole bunch of other ones. Tara Trent, who was Oprah's favorite ever guest, Trent Shelton, a former NBA or NFL player, and 1,000 words per chapter, and I share an insight from them. I'll give you a glimpse. The insight from Seth Godin is the difference between being fearless and being reckless. Huge difference. And a lot of us confuse the two. And I share some insights around that. I shared insight from FranklinCovey's chief people officer around the idea that people are not an organization's most valuable asset. It's not true. It's the relationships between people that are your ultimate. And there's just a whole learning. And these are, you might say, this isn't transformative. Well, I think it is. So I've written a story about the insight, sometimes how I was able to achieve it, or I struggled, or how my friend Betsy may have, seen it come alive. And there's 40 people that are being highlighted. And Larry King is writing the intro for me as kind of the ultimate interviewer. He's the only endorsement I wanted. And we met 2 days ago. He's agreed to endorse the book. And he's like, I'm so excited. He says, I'll write the forward to it. So I'm honored that Larry King is 80, almost 86 now.
Wow.
He's writing the intro. And I expect to write a volume every year till I die. So I've already got like the next 40 people lined up for volume 2. I just have to have time, find the time to, finish writing it. So the manuscript is due. Thank you, Betsy, for the tee up and the shout out, called Master Mentors. It isn't up yet on Amazon. It'll come out in early 2021, probably February, March. I said January, but I'm tweaking some things. I want it to be really reflective of the landscape and make sure that I'm adequately highlighting people from different genders, faiths, ethnicities. I feel good about the balance, no pandering, but I think it'll be a great book. Thanks.
Well, we can't wait to get our hands on it. It sounds like it'll be on the top of our 2021 reading list.
Oh, I hope so.
Scott, is there any community organization or nonprofit that you want to give a shout out to? We really enjoy on our show just putting a spotlight on really good organizations that are doing good works out there. There's certainly room for more good news in the world, right? So what's an organization that's doing some good work out there that you're aware of?
Gosh, you mean so many, right? I mean, where do you start? Mine today would be the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. I had the privilege of interviewing Elizabeth Smart on the podcast. And I don't know if you saw that podcast. But
I listened to it. It was phenomenal. She is an amazing woman.
Amazing. She lives not too far from me. She's here in Salt Lake, or in Park City. I don't know her personally. We have a lot of mutual friends, but I don't know her personally. And her story will leave you speechless. And she wrote a book recently that I highlighted in the program, just around forgiveness and moving forward, moving on. And I didn't delve into Elizabeth's kidnapping on the podcast. If you remember, I started it with her rescue. Because when you read her book, you'll regret it.
Really?
When you read her book about her capture, you'll kind of regret reading it because it'll change your life. Regret it meaning I have 3 boys, and I started reading it. I had to put it down because I didn't want that on my mind. I'm speaking now about it from a dad's point of view. I know our time is tight.
Oh, no, you're good. Go ahead.
Her heart, her mind, her spirit, her unbridled generosity. If Elizabeth Smart can forgive the man who repeatedly raped her night after night, day after day for 9 months, if Elizabeth Smart can forgive the man who stole her life from her, then all of us can forgive everybody who's said something rude to us or slighted us or not paid us back. So the work that Elizabeth Smart is doing with abuse victims and recovery is remarkable. And so check out Elizabeth Smart Foundation. I think she is a hero, not from her own desire or doing, but from her ability to transform her life to a mother, I think of 3 or 4 kids now. And I want to pay tribute to her because she has softened my heart. If Elizabeth Smart can forgive the man who did what he did to her, you can pretty much forgive everything coming your way.
Well said. Well said. We'll put the link to her foundation in the show notes as well.
I mean to leave that on a high. That was a little bit heavy. And I didn't really know I was going to pick that one until about midway through. But I mean that to be inspiring, right? Be kinder.
No, it totally is. And it's what we need right now for sure with everything that's going on. I think it's very inspiring and uplifting to think that we can all do better in that regard. So yeah, Scott, thank you so much for your time. It's just been an absolute pleasure. If you haven't listened to the On Leadership with Scott Miller podcast yet, I highly recommend it. And
Absolutely.
Scott, hopefully we'll have more opportunities to chat with you.
Well, I would love to come back. Best of success to you, your class acts. And thank you for the platform today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott. I'm not sure there's enough to say about this podcast. I've got to go back and listen to the interview myself. Just phenomenal how Scott thinks, how he sees leadership, and how relevant that is to really knowing your customer. I mean, just there's a few things that he pointed out over and over again. And I don't know how many times he mentioned them, but it was vulnerability, humility, and emotional agility. And I was about ready to start rapping that or something because that rhyme there. But it's true. We've talked about this with other guests we've had on the podcast here. We've got to have the vulnerability, the humility, and his term, emotional agility, to be able to listen, that unfiltered listening that we talk about all the time, and then to take that back to your team. But it's not just listening to your customers, it's listening to your team. What are they hearing from the customers? What do they need to do? What do you need to do in your sales meeting? So as you're listening, you're understanding where the customer wants to go. So it's just truly a fascinating interview. And I am so whelmed by what he's given us that I do want to go back and listen to this again because there's so much good stuff in here.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. And I've been all over their website. There's so much good content in there. So if you want to hear more from Scott or from FranklinCovey, they have so much content, plus Scott's podcast, his blog, his books, just so much good thought leadership that it all stands the test of time. It's not the new shiny stuff. It really does stand the test of time. And I'm just thrilled to death that we could have him on the show today. And audience, if you enjoy that episode and any of the other episodes on the Really Know Your Customer podcast, we'd really appreciate a review on whatever platform you listen to your podcast on. So again, Tony, thank you. This has been so much fun, and we will see you next time on the Really Know Your Customer podcast.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Really Know Your Customer. We hope you gained a lot of value from being here today. If you want to learn more about the work Betsy and Tony do to help their clients thrive, visit Betsy at thecongruitygroup.com and Tony at tonybodoh.com. See you next time on the Really Know Your Customer show.